Governor J.B. Pritzker says he is not a constitutional expert, but still remains confident that the courts are going to side with him when it comes to the ban that he signed into place, limiting the purchase of certain semi-automatic guns and magazines over a certain capacity, and ultimately leading to a gun registry starting October 1st that wraps up January 1st with penalties if you don't register your firearms by then. So this obviously is an ongoing issue. It's been somebody typically on YouTube tells me how many days it's been for the assault weapons ban, but that was signed January 10th, and questions persist as to how this is being enforced. I still have a pending Freedom of Information Act request to the Illinois Attorney General's office about what guidance they've given to the state police after the Macon County case, where Dan Calkins brought a case against the state, and the Macon County judge issued a final judgment declaring that the law is unconstitutional. Well, there have been questions as if a judge adjudicates a law unconstitutional, then how can you enforce such a law? Now, I know there's a lot of questions, and that's why I'm trying to get the guidance that the Illinois Attorney General has given to Illinois State Police, because Illinois State Police say they're following the various court orders and also the guidance from the Illinois Attorney General, but they didn't necessarily explicitly say that they are enforcing the gun ban. So still waiting on that official word from the Illinois Attorney General's office on what that guidance is. Regardless, you've got Governor J.B. Pritzker still fielding questions about judicial integrity on the state level case. Again, that Calkins brought, it's now going to be heard by the Illinois Supreme Court in mid-May. And the questions have been raised about judicial integrity because Governor J.B. Pritzker gave $1 million to each of two then Illinois Supreme Court justice candidates who got elected in November and are on the bench that is set to hear the gun ban. They've already been on the bench of 7 justices, so 2 of them winning election, getting $1 million each from Governor J.B. Pritzker. They were on the bench for Tuesday's hearing on the no cash bail law that's part of the Safety Act. So, there's still ongoing questions, and even Governor J.B. Pritzker having to answer those questions again yesterday at a stop here in Springfield. And this was not a question from me. I had asked an initial question about, the confidence level he has, not just at the state level court, but also in the federal court. We'll get to that response coming up because there are some developments in the federal court case in the Southern District. And we'll hear what the governor's thoughts are, especially after he says that, hey, 8 other states have similar bans in place. So Illinois' ban should be fine. Well, some pushback on that after a U.S. Supreme Court decision out of New York last summer. But to the question of the judicial integrity, another reporter yesterday in Springfield asked the question of what did he hope to gain from that $1 million donation to each of 2 Illinois Supreme Court justice candidates. Here's the governor's response to that question.
Well, my hope is that good people get elected to public office. That's why I think you would contribute, or anybody else in this room would contribute to somebody. I would also point out that, unlike what some people are putting forward among the right wing, the truth of the matter is that my name is on these suits because I am an official representative of the state of Illinois. When I became governor, there were suits that were outstanding, and Rauner's name was removed from those suits, and my name was put on them. It had nothing to do with me specifically, just the fact that I happened to be governor at that time and this time. So the conflicts that have been alleged are just, false. And I'm must say that I think people who run for judge do it for the right reasons, and I think that people who give to candidates for judge do it for the right reasons, and judges ultimately are required to make their independent decisions about the cases, and I think that's what judges that any of us support should do, and I hope will do.
Again, Governor J.B. Pritzker reacting to a question about what did he hope to get from the $1 million donations to 2 then Supreme Court justice candidates that are now on the bench. Again, he brushes it off as a right-wing concern. I know a lot of people in the so-called left wing that I guess the governor is assuming is there because he keeps pointing to right-wing concerns. But I know plenty of people in the left wing that are concerned about judicial integrity. I know plenty of people from all walks of the political spectrum that have serious concerns about big money involved in politics. And Governor Pritzker, being a billionaire, using his millions upon millions that he put into his own campaign coffers, $300+ million, and using that money to fund the Supreme Court justice candidates. People have significant problems with that, especially if the governor has a political agenda that he's trying to get the courts to uphold after the legislature, which he also gave various sums to, pass legislation in lockstep with his agenda. I know this is politics, but when it gets to that third branch of government that's supposed to be a check, that's where people have concerns. And there's also been concerns raised that the Illinois Supreme Court's Twitter page, of all things, was working to hide certain comments. And I actually saw this from another blogger online, part of Mom at Arms, Mom-at-Arms, and they brought the initial questions forward about this $1 million donation, public sourcing. It's on the Illinois Sunshine, and you can see it clearly. $500,000 from his trust, $500,000 from his political fund to two Supreme Court justice candidates, total of $2 million. People have been raising questions about that, and we saw that the Illinois Supreme Court Twitter page was actually hiding some of those comments. You had to click through an extra link to see all these comments questioning judicial ethics. I sent a message asking if they were doing that and why, and then that button apparently cleared up, and now you can see all those messages on Twitter. So kind of interesting to see what's happening here when it comes to the questions of judicial ethics, it being brushed off as some kind of right-wing conspiracy theory, but judicial ethics are something I think a lot of people are concerned about. So stay tuned. We got to get an update on the federal cases. We've been focusing a lot on the state Supreme Court and the state's cases challenging the gun ban, but what about the federal case in the Southern District, where you've got 4 consolidated cases? The Illinois Sheriff's Association, they filed an amicus brief yesterday. We're expecting a filing today from the state to answer the Second Amendment challenge. We'll get to some of that coming up next. It is Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk.
Well, my hope is that good people get elected to public office. That's why I think you would contribute, or anybody else in this room would contribute to somebody. I would also point out that, unlike what some people are putting forward among the right wing, the truth of the matter is that my name is on these suits because I am an official representative of the state of Illinois. When I became governor, there were suits that were outstanding, and Rauner's name was removed from those suits, and my name was put on them. It had nothing to do with me specifically, just the fact that I happened to be governor at that time.
And just so happens to be you're the one that took the action to sign a law to allow it to go forward. You, the individual, as the governor, signing that law that people allege violates their Second Amendment rights. So that's the governor's response. He also went on to say, hey, I think judges run for a good reason. And he says, I believe that people donate to judges for a good reason, but he continues to brush off concerns of judicial integrity at the state's Supreme Court, where he gave $1 million to each of 2 Supreme Court justice candidates got elected in November. So from the state court to the federal court, there's some action that is expected today. The state has a deadline of today to file their response to the charge of a Second Amendment violation in the 4 consolidated cases in the Southern District of Illinois. Now, those 4 cases are consolidated in the federal courts. We're not talking about the state courts. We're talking about the federal courts. And this is a filing that the state is supposed to make to address the allegations that these 4 cases have brought forward that the gun ban violates their Second Amendment rights. Now, somebody on YouTube questioned here, and I think this is important to highlight. It seems that we we should keep our 2A rights while this law is being contested in court. Just a thought. Well, that's what the preliminary injunction that the Southern District of Illinois cases are looking to get. And they're actually going to have a hearing on that preliminary injunction, which would put a hold to the law. If the judge grants that, it would put a hold on the law while the case proceeds forward until maybe an appellate court overturns that injunction or gets all the way to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court overturns the injunction and certifies the law as constitutional, or it could block the law all the way up until maybe the Supreme Court deems the law unconstitutional, null and void. So the preliminary injunction hearing for the Southern District is in April. So the second week of April, I believe April 12th is when the Southern District is going to hear the 4 cases that are consolidated challenging the state's ban on guns and magazines in Illinois. And again, the state has to respond to the challenge. They have to file a brief to the challenge of the gun ban being unconstitutional because it's a violation of the Second Amendment. So that's at the federal court level. And in the federal court level, you've got the cases that have been brought forward, all 4 of them. You've got one from the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which is the lead case, one from the Illinois State Rifle Association, one from Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois, and another one from Crawford County that was transferred from state court to federal court. So in that case, you actually have amicus briefs that have been filed. Last week, an amicus brief was filed by Everytown for gun safety, and they supported the state in the gun ban. And if you click through, you can see the article I wrote about this and the filing that they made. It's about 22 pages long. And essentially, what they say here is that the plaintiffs who are challenging the law, they have yet to meet their burden to establish the Second Amendment's plain text covers their conduct. And here's a quote from that lawsuit. Because they've failed to establish that assault weapons and large capacity magazines are among the arms the Second Amendment protects, Bruin further confirmed that the inquiry should focus on common use for the lawful purpose of self-defense. Common use. Common use, a lot of people argue, is AR-15s. It's a commonly owned firearm and something that people have in their homes. Common use. And the question of just what exactly common is, obviously, for the courts to determine. But you also have yesterday, so Everytown filed their amicus brief last week, I believe, or earlier this month. Yesterday, the Illinois Sheriff's Association, they filed their amicus brief, and they filed it in opposition of the gun ban. And you can see some of the main points they put up. They say that the bill is an obvious violation of the Second Amendment. They go on to say that striking down the law avoids enforcement of facially unconstitutional prohibitions regarding firearms. Goes on to say infringement of the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens is not justified by criminal activity. And they conclude that ultimately, because of Bruin, and I'll read here just a little bit of what they had to say. They said, within the framework recognized by Bruin, these regulatory efforts were either too little or too late to constitute an historical tradition of firearm regulations that could overcome the presumption that such regulations are prohibited by the Second Amendment. They go on to say that they have problems with enforcing what they deem an unconstitutional law. They say, quote, it's the open and obvious disregard for the Second Amendment's reach that puts law enforcement officials in an untenable position and justifies immediate relief through a preliminary injunction against enforcement of House Bill 5471. So these are, I think, at least the amicus, the friend of the court briefs that were filed. And you hear the reference there to the Bruin decision. That's the case out of New York where last year the U.S. Supreme Court gun rights groups have essentially said you can't use a balanced interest approach. You can't say, oh, we can curb rights because it protects the public, and then throw a bunch of stats and say, hey, this is why we need to protect the public because of all these stats. You can't do that, according to what gun rights supporters interpret the Bruin decision as, because they say the Bruin decision has the courts to look at the text and tradition of the Second Amendment, which is A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So we'll see that argument. But I asked Governor J.B. Pritzker yesterday to react, because he said, listen, previously he said, this is going to keep people safe. A certain percentage is going to keep them safe. But then he goes on to say that, well, there are 8 other states that have similar gun bans in place, so Illinois is legal. I said, are you still confident in the U.S. Supreme Court that you're going to be successful? Because you've got the issue of Bruin, and that's a new Supreme Court precedent. Illinois' case may be the first one to test that. We shall see. But I also asked the governor about President Joe Biden's executive orders on firearm sales, and he started off answering that question, but then he gets into the issue of his confidence levels and how he says he's not a constitutional law expert, but he's still confident that the gun ban's constitutional. Here's the governor.
Well, let's start with what the federal government is doing. Let me say we need to do so much more. There needs to be a federal ban on assault weapons. That's something that I advocated when I was with the president not that long ago, and have talked to him on periodic occasions about that. And I think he's trying to take the steps that he can take as chief executive to reduce gun violence across the country. With regard to the cases that are coming up in the federal courts, I'm not a constitutional law expert. I mean, as you know, I'm an attorney, but I think I took 2 courses in constitutional law during my 3 years as a student in law school, and I wouldn't deign to offer a more expert opinion than I think the ones that you've heard. But I am confident that the federal courts and the Supreme Court can and should find that the assault weapons ban that we passed in the state of Illinois is constitutional. I think it follows the requirements of the cases that have been decided previously. So it seems like that should be the future of this, that it's found constitutional.
Well, we'll see what the arguments ultimately are, with the state set today to file their response to the challenge that their law violates the Second Amendment, and that's going to be filed in the Southern District of Illinois. We will get that filing, we'll unpack that filing, and bring that to you here tomorrow. But that's the latest twists and turns in the litigation against Illinois' gun ban that was enacted January 10th. Here it is, March 16th. And it's going to be something we'll continue to watch for you. So I appreciate everybody chiming in. You can email me, bishoponair@gmail.com, or you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Just search Bishop on Air, and we can connect that.